A privileged bully thought his father's money made him untouchable until he grabbed a black teacher's throat in front of his friends and discovered the decorated war veteran hiding behind her lesson plans. The fluorescent lights of Lincoln Preparatory's advanced chemistry lab hummed their usual Tuesday morning tune. Students drifted in wearing designer sneakers and entitled smirks, their voices filling the sterile space with complaints about last night's homework and weekend plans that cost more than most teachers' monthly salaries. But at the front of the room, arranging beakers with military precision, stood Sergeant Maya Reynolds, though no student called her anything but Miss Reynolds. The way she moved told a story her mouth never would. Shoulders squared, spine straight as a rifle barrel, every gesture economical and purposeful. That heavy gold ring on her right hand caught the light as she worked, the one she never explained, never removed, and never let anyone touch. The whispers followed her everywhere. Too intense, too controlled, maybe ex-cop, definitely hiding something. Students tested her boundaries like wolves probing a fence, searching for weakness. They found none, just those dark eyes that seemed to calculate trajectories and assess threats instead of grading lab reports. And then there was Tyler Briggs, golden-haired, quarterback-built, and absolutely convinced the world owed him applause. Behind him stood his crew of enablers, the boys who laughed at his cruelty and treated teachers like paid entertainment. Tyler had perfected the art of destruction. A cutting remark here, a racist joke there, all delivered with that shark smile that said my daddy's on the school board. What are you going to do about it? On this particular morning, in that lab full of volatile chemicals and even more volatile egos, these two forces were about to collide. And the moment Tyler's hand closed around Miss Reynolds's throat, captured forever in the stunned faces of his friends, he would learn exactly what kind of weapon the school district had accidentally hired. Not just a teacher, a soldier who'd survived combat zones he couldn't pronounce. A nightmare in a lab coat who'd been waiting her whole civilian life to stop pretending she was harmless. Sergeant Maya Reynolds had learned long ago that civilians read body language the way children read picture books, surface level, missing every crucial detail. They saw her straight spine and called it intimidating. They noticed her economy of movement and whispered control freak. They watched her scan every room she entered and decided she was paranoid or intense or their favorite. She's got that cop energy, you know? They had no idea how wrong they were. Cops were one thing. What she'd been was something else entirely. She arrived at Lincoln Preparatory 43 minutes before first period every morning. Not because the teacher's handbook recommended it, but because old habits carved grooves too deep to escape. Secure the perimeter. Assess sightlines. Identify exits. The fact that the perimeter was now a chemistry lab instead of a forward operating base changed nothing about the ritual. The heavy gold ring on her right hand caught the early light as she arranged lab equipment with the same precision she'd once used to field strip a rifle. The ring had belonged to her father, Master Sergeant Aaron Reynolds, who died in Kandahar 3 weeks before her own deployment ended. She'd worn it through every firefight after that, every patrol, every moment when she needed to remember why she kept getting up. Now she wore it through every school day, and somehow that fell harder. "Morning, Maya," chirped Sandra Lou, the biology teacher, poking her head through the doorway. Sandra was all warmth and casual familiarity, the kind of person who brought homemade cookies to faculty meetings and knew everyone's birthday. "Staff meeting at lunch today. Don't forget." Maya nodded once, a gesture that could have meant anything. Sandra's smile flickered, that familiar confusion crossing her face, before she retreated down the hallway. Maya heard her whisper to someone, "I swear, that woman's like Fort Knox. Sweet as can be, but you never really know her, you know?" They never did, and Maya had learned to prefer it that way. The students began filtering in at 7:48. Maya tracked each entrance with peripheral vision while appearing focused on her lesson plan. Backpack weights, gait patterns, who walked with confidence, who with fear, who with that particular swagger that meant trouble. Tyler Briggs and his crew always entered together, a pack formation that made lesser students step aside. She'd identified Tyler as a threat on day 3. Not a physical threat, not to her, but a social predator nonetheless. The kind of boy who'd learned early that his father's position on the school board was armor, that his family's country club connections were weapons, that the right words could destroy without ever landing a punch. He'd tested her twice already. Small provocations, a dismissive comment about diversity hires, a theatrical yawn during her explanation of molecular bonds. Both times, Maya had simply continued teaching, her voice never rising, her expression never changing. She'd seen insurgents try to provoke reactions from convoys. Tyler Briggs, with his expensive haircut and his father's lawyers, was nothing. But the whispers had intensified after those encounters. She's definitely ex-military, Jasmine Shun had murmured to her lab partner last week, loud enough for Maya to hear. Nah, probably just grew up strict, someone else countered. Maya's like that. Super religious. My money's on cop, Tyler had announced, leaning back in his chair with that insufferable confidence. She's got that whole I could arrest you vibe. Probably couldn't hack it and ended up here instead. His friends had laughed. Maya had simply placed a beaker on his desk with enough precision that the glass rang like a bell, then moved on without a word. Let them guess. Let them whisper. Let them construct whatever story made them comfortable. The truth, the decorated combat veteran, the woman who'd earned 3 commendations and a Purple Heart before turning 30, the soldier who still woke up some nights with her hand reaching for a sidearm that no longer existed. That truth was buried so deep, even she sometimes forgot where she'd put it. Until moments like this, arranging glassware in perfect rows, when her hands remembered everything her mouth refused to say. Tyler Briggs entered rooms the way emperors entered conquered cities, with the absolute certainty that everything within sight belonged to him by birthright. He was 17, quarterback built, with the kind of symmetrical features that made casting directors salivate and college recruiters ignore red flags. His honey brown hair fell, just so, styled to look effortless in a way that required 20 minutes and $70 product. His clothes screamed old money trying to whisper. The Patagonia jacket worn over a vintage band tee, designer jeans that cost more than Maya's monthly car payment, sneakers that dropped as limited editions and somehow always ended up on his feet first. But it was his eyes that told the real story, blue and sharp and utterly empty of doubt. They were the eyes of someone who'd never been told no in a way that stuck, never faced a consequence that couldn't be negotiated away, never encountered a boundary his father's money couldn't redraw. Behind him, always, came his crew. There was Marcus Fleming, tall and lanky with nervous energy, who laughed too loud at Tyler's jokes and had mastered the art of being cruel while maintaining plausible deniability. I was just kidding, Miss Reynolds. God, can't anyone take a joke anymore? That was Marcus's signature move, the retreat disguised as counterattack. Then Connor Price, stockier and quieter, who served as Tyler's enforcer without ever throwing a punch. Connor's father was a defense attorney who specialized in making problems disappear for the right price. Connor had inherited his father's talent for finding leverage, for knowing exactly which secrets to whisper and when. The 3 of them moved through Lincoln Preparatory like sharks through a reef, and the smaller fish had learned to scatter. Maya had read Tyler's file during her first week. Not the official one. That was useless, all sanitized language and carefully worded incidents. No, she'd pieced together the real story from faculty lounge whispers, from careful questions asked to the right veteran teachers, from the way certain staff members' faces tightened when his name came up. Tyler Briggs collected teacher casualties the way some boys collected baseball cards. Mr. Patterson, the English teacher, had lasted until October of Tyler's sophomore year. Patterson had been young, idealistic, fresh from his master's program, with a head full of pedagogy and a heart full of hope. He tried to engage Tyler in a discussion about racial themes in To Kill a Mockingbird. Tyler had smiled that shark smile and said, I think it's interesting that you're so obsessed with race, Mr. Patterson. Kind of make you wonder what you're compensating for, doesn't it? The implication had hung in the air like poison gas. Patterson, who was white and desperately trying to be an ally, had stammered through a response that only made things worse. By November, Tyler had the entire class making subtle comments about white guilt and virtue signaling whenever Patterson spoke. By December, Patterson was on stress leave. By January, he'd transferred to a school in another district. Then there was Mrs. Chun, the chemistry teacher Maya had replaced. 58 years old, Chinese immigrant, PhD from Berkeley, and 23 years of teaching experience that meant nothing against Tyler's particular brand of warfare. He'd started small, mispronouncing her name despite corrections. Chan, what's the difference? He'd say with theatrical confusion, getting laughs from students who knew better but enjoyed the show. Then came the questions designed to look innocent. Mrs. Chan, sorry, Chen, where are you really from? And when she'd say California, no, I mean originally. Like, originally. The other teachers said she'd held strong for months. She'd tried reasoning, tried discipline referrals that went nowhere because Tyler's father knew everyone who mattered. She tried ignoring him, which only made him escalate. Finally, during a lab practical, Tyler had commented loudly about foreign teachers taking jobs from Americans while staring directly at her. Mrs. Chun had finished the period with shaking hands. She'd submitted her retirement papers that afternoon, 6 years earlier than planned. The principal, a spineless administrator named Whitmore who spent more time golfing with parents than managing his school, had called it an unfortunate misunderstanding. Tyler's father had made a generous donation to the new STEM wing. Everyone had moved on. Everyone except Mrs. Chun, who'd spent 23 years building a career that a 17-year-old had dismantled in less than one. Maya had heard other stories too. The black substitute teacher Tyler had interrogated about diversity quotas until she'd requested a different assignment. The young male teacher he'd accused of inappropriate favoritism toward female students, a rumor that had followed the man despite being completely fabricated. The coach who'd benched him for missing practice and found his car keyed in the parking lot. Nothing ever stuck to Tyler. His father, Richard Briggs, was CEO of some tech company whose name was on half the buildings downtown. His mother sat on every charitable board that mattered. His grandfather had endowed a chair at the university. The family had the kind of money that didn't just open doors, it removed them from the hinges entirely. And Tyler had learned early that with enough wealth and the right last name, you could destroy anyone who forgot their place in the hierarchy. As Maya watched him swagger to his lab station that Tuesday morning, she saw him clearly. Not just a bully, but a budding predator whose cruelty had been reinforced at every turn. He was surrounded by enablers, protected by power, and completely convinced of his own invincibility. Marcus and Connor flanked him, already smirking at some private joke, already scanning for weakness. Tyler himself was looking directly at Maya with those empty blue eyes, assessing, calculating, wondering how long it would take to break this one. He had no idea he was staring at someone who'd learned about power in places where money meant nothing, where survival required something his father's wealth could never purchase. Maya met his gaze without blinking, her face as unreadable as concrete, and watched him mistake her stillness for uncertainty. It was almost sad, she thought, how many people confused patience with weakness. Almost. The periodic table on the wall behind Maya seemed to hum with irony as she introduced the day's lesson on chemical bonds, the forces that held things together and the precise conditions required to break them apart. Ionic bonds form between atoms with significantly different electronegativities, she said, her voice carrying that particular flatness that made students unconsciously straighten in their seats. One atom strips electrons from another. Dominance and submission at the molecular level. She watched Tyler's mouth quirk at the word submission. Of course it did. Today you'll be synthesizing copper sulfate crystals. The procedure is in your packets. Read it completely before touching any equipment. Questions? Tyler's hand went up immediately, not raised so much as lazily lifted, fingers dangling with studied carelessness. Yes, Mr. Briggs. I'm just wondering, he said, his voice pitched perfectly for the audience of his peers. What qualifications does someone need to teach AP chemistry these days? Like, do you actually need a chemistry degree? Or is it more of a general situation? The question landed like he'd intended, with enough plausible deniability to seem innocent while carrying an unmistakable edge. Several students shifted uncomfortably. Marcus and Connor grinned. Maya's expression didn't change by a single muscle fiber. MIT, undergraduate degree in chemical engineering. Johns Hopkins, master's in chemistry. Is there a specific aspect of my qualifications that concerns you, Mr. Briggs, or may we proceed with the synthesis? She watched him recalibrate. He'd expected defensiveness, emotion, something he could leverage. Instead, he'd gotten facts delivered with the warmth of a ballistic report. No, I was just curious, he said, pivoting smoothly. I mean, we had Mrs. Chun for 2 years, and she had a PhD from Berkeley. That's like a real research university. I just wondered if there was, a teacher shortage or something. There was the comparison designed to sting, the implication that Maya was a downgrade, a replacement hired out of desperation rather than merit. Several students glanced at Maya, waiting for the flinch. Mrs. Chun was an exceptional educator, Maya said evenly. I'm sure she taught you the importance of following laboratory protocols precisely. Let's honor her legacy by demonstrating you retain that lesson. Begin your synthesis. She turned to the whiteboard and began writing the balanced equation, her handwriting precisely uniform, each character exactly the same height. Behind her, she heard Tyler's frustrated exhale, the sound of a predator whose prey had refused to run. 20 minutes into the lab period, Maya circulated through the stations with a clipboard, checking technique and recording observations. She moved with that distinctive economy of motion, never wasting a step, never turning her back to the room's entrances. Old habits. Tyler's station was predictably chaotic. He'd skipped the instructions entirely, was heating his solution too rapidly, and had somehow managed to contaminate his copper sulfate with what looked like sodium chloride from the adjacent station. Maya stopped beside him, her presence as deliberate as a period at the end of a sentence. Your solution is contaminated, she said. Start over. Tyler looked up, that shark smile spreading across his face. I think it's fine, actually. Maybe you're seeing things that aren't there. Ever have that problem? The implication was clear. Crazy teacher, paranoid teacher, incompetent teacher. Choose your narrative. Maya reached past him, picked up his beaker, and held it to the light. The solution was cloudy instead of clear, particles suspended where none should exist. Sodium contamination, she said, setting it down with enough control that the glass didn't make a sound. Observe the turbidity. If you'd read the procedure, you'd know copper sulfate crystallizes only from pure solution. This is waste. Dispose of it properly and begin again. Or, Tyler said, leaning back on his stool with that infuriating casualness. Maybe different people have different approaches. Maybe there's not just one right way to do things. Isn't that what education is supposed to be about? Critical thinking? Innovation? Marcus snorted with laughter. Connor was recording on his phone, barely concealing it. Maya's eyes met Tyler's and held them. She didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't give him anything except the absolute certainty that she'd seen through every layer of his performance to the insecure child underneath. Chemistry, she said quietly, doesn't negotiate. Molecules don't care about your father's position or your philosophical objections to authority. They react according to laws that existed before you were born and will continue after you're gone. You can accept that reality and learn, or you can fail. Your choice, Mr. Briggs. Make it quickly and stop wasting class time. She watched his jaw tighten, watched the anger flash across his face before he controlled it. He'd expected her to argue, to defend critical thinking, or get tangled in semantics. Instead, she'd reduced him to a simple binary, comply or fail. Fine, he said, the word sharp enough to cut. I'll start over. But just so you know, my father sits on the curriculum board. They're very interested in teaching quality. Very interested in whether teachers are, creating a positive learning environment. There it was, the threat poorly disguised as concern, the reminder of who held real power in this equation. Maya picked up his contaminated beaker and walked it to the waste disposal herself, her back to him now, trusting her peripheral vision the way she always had. When she returned, She placed a fresh beaker on his station with the same precision she'd used for everything else. "Then I'm sure your father will be pleased to see your improved technique," she said. "Begin again. And Mr. Briggs? Turn your burner to medium heat, not high, unless you're attempting to demonstrate the exothermic decomposition of copper sulfate, in which case you should probably warn your classmates to evacuate first." She moved to the next station, leaving Tyler staring at the fresh beaker with his hands clenched and his face red. For the rest of the period, Maya felt his eyes on her like laser designators. Every time she turned, he was watching, studying, looking for cracks in her armor. She gave him nothing, just circulated, corrected, guided students through their procedures with the same clinical detachment she'd shown him. When Marcus deliberately forgot to wear his safety goggles, she handed him a pair without comment. When Connor tried to engage her in conversation about whether the lab practical would be weighted heavily on the final exam, a transparent attempt to gather ammunition, she simply referred him to the syllabus and moved on. By the end of class, Tyler's crystal synthesis had failed twice more. His solution kept crystallizing too quickly, forming powder instead of the large, defined crystals the assignment required. Maya watched him grow increasingly frustrated, watched him glance at Connor's successful formation, watched the humiliation build. When the bell rang, most students filed out quickly, relieved to escape the tension that had been building like pressure in a sealed container. Tyler remained at his station, staring at his failed experiment with something ugly twisting across his features. Maya began collecting beakers from the front stations, working her way backward through the lab. When she reached Tyler's station, she found him still sitting there, his failed crystals glittering mockingly under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "class has ended." He looked up at her with those empty blue eyes, and for just a moment, she saw past the performance to something darker underneath. Not a student struggling with chemistry. A predator deciding whether his prey was worth the effort of a prolonged hunt. "Yeah," he said softly. "I guess it has." He gathered his things slowly, deliberately, making her wait, making sure she understood that he could control the pace of something, even if it was just his own exit. At the doorway, he paused. "You know what I think, Miss Reynolds?" he said, not quite looking at her. "I think you're trying really hard to prove something. I just haven't figured out what yet." Then he was gone, leaving Maya alone in the lab with rows of successful crystal formations and one station of glittering failure. She stood there for a moment, her father's ring heavy on her hand, and wondered how much longer she could keep burying the parts of herself that knew exactly how to handle threats like Tyler Briggs. "Not much longer," whispered a voice that sounded like gunfire and sand and the person she used to be. "Not much longer at all." Tyler came to Thursday's class with something new in his posture, a coiled tension that Maya recognized immediately from 1,000 threat assessments in 1,000 hostile environments. He wasn't just annoyed anymore. He was committed to escalation. She'd seen it before, in young soldiers who'd been corrected one too many times, in local militia leaders who'd lost face in front of their men. Pride was a dangerous accelerant, and Tyler Briggs was soaked in it. The lesson was on reaction rates and catalysts, the substances that lowered activation energy, making reactions occur faster than they would naturally. Maya appreciated the metaphor even as she watched it play out in real time. Tyler entered with Marcus and Connor flanking him like winged men, but today his usual swagger had sharpened into something more purposeful. He dressed for battle in his own way. The vintage Jordan jersey that probably cost 4 figures, designer rips in his jeans, placed with mathematical precision, and that expression of supreme confidence that came from a night of planning with his father's money as a safety net. Maya tracked him to his station and watched him deliberately set up facing her desk rather than his lab bench, a territorial claim that made several students shift uncomfortably. She began the lesson without acknowledging his performance. "Catalysts," she said, writing the word in her precise script, "lower the activation energy required for a reaction. They don't change the outcome, only the speed at which you arrive there." "Speaking of speed," Tyler interrupted, his voice pitched loud enough to stop her mid-sentence. "I'm just wondering how quickly this school went from having actual qualified teachers to, well, filling quotas." The classroom went silent with that particular quality of quiet that meant everyone knew exactly what had just happened. Several students stared at their lab benches. Jasmine Chin's eyes went wide. Even Marcus looked uncomfortable, though Connor was already smirking. Maya turned from the board slowly, deliberately, giving Tyler exactly what he wanted, her full attention. "Clarify your question, Mr. Briggs." "I'm just saying," he continued, leaning back in his chair with studied casualness. "Mrs. Chun had a PhD from Berkeley. Real research credentials. And now we've got, what exactly? Someone who took a couple chemistry classes between, I don't know, whatever other jobs didn't work out." He paused, letting the implications settle like sediment in a solution. "It's just interesting timing, you know? The school gets all these diversity mandates from the district, and suddenly we're getting teachers who maybe aren't quite as qualified, but check certain boxes. No offense, obviously. I'm just making an observation about systemic patterns." There it was, the racism gift-wrapped in pseudo-intellectual language, the attack designed to look like legitimate criticism of hiring practices. No offense, obviously. The coward's addendum. Maya set down her marker with precise care and faced him fully, her hands relaxed at her sides, her weight balanced evenly on both feet. Old stance. Familiar. "Mr. Briggs," she said, her voice carrying that flatness that came from briefing rooms and mission prep. "I want to make sure I understand your hypothesis. You believe I was hired not on merit, but because the district needed to increase demographic representation in its teaching staff. Is that correct?" Tyler's smile widened. He thought he'd gotten to her, thought the careful rephrasing meant she was defensive. "I mean, if the lab coat fits." A few nervous laughs scattered through the classroom. Connor's phone was definitely recording now. Maya walked toward Tyler's station with measured steps, stopping exactly 6 feet away. Interview distance, non-threatening, but commanding attention. She clasped her hands loosely in front of her, the gold ring catching the light. "Let me share some facts," she said. MIT undergraduate degree, summa cum laude. Johns Hopkins Masters, completed while serving active duty with distinction in the United States Army. 8 years of service, 3 overseas deployments. And before you suggest those credentials are somehow insufficient, let me add that I was recruited by Lincoln Preparatory specifically because of my expertise in chemical engineering and my experience training personnel in high-stress environments. She paused, watching Tyler smile falter slightly. "Now, regarding systemic patterns," she continued, her voice dropping half an octave into something colder, "let's discuss your father's position on the school board. Richard Briggs was appointed, not elected, after the previous board member resigned following ethics violations. Your father's company donated $2 million to the district that same year, which is public record. His voting record shows he's consistently opposed merit-based evaluation reforms for both students and staff, preferring instead the legacy admission systems that ensure families like yours maintain institutional access regardless of qualification." The classroom had gone absolutely silent. Several students were staring at Maya like she'd just pulled a grenade pin with her teeth. "So when you reference systemic patterns, Mr. Briggs, I wonder if you're genuinely concerned about meritocracy, or if you're simply uncomfortable encountering someone you can intimidate with your father's checkbook and your casual racism." Tyler's face had gone red, that particular shade that meant humiliation mixing with rage. His hands gripped the edge of his desk hard enough that his knuckles went white. "You can't talk to me like that," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "You can't just accuse me of—" "I haven't accused you of anything," Maya interrupted, her tone clinical. "I've stated facts about your father's position and presented my own credentials in response to your questions about my qualifications. If you interpret factual statements as accusations, that suggests interesting things about your own awareness of the dynamics you benefit from." She turned back toward the board, dismissing him as thoroughly as any drill sergeant dismissing a subordinate. Now, as I was saying before the interruption, catalysts lower activation energy. They speed up inevitable reactions. In this case, Mr. Briggs has helpfully demonstrated how pride can catalyze the transformation of subtle prejudice into overt disrespect. She picked up her marker and continued writing as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just verbally dismantled the most powerful student in the school in front of his friends and his phone camera. Behind her, she heard Tyler's breathing accelerate, heard the scrape of his chair, heard Marcus whisper urgently, "Dude, leave it. She's not worth it." But Maya knew better. She'd seen this escalation pattern before, in a dozen different contexts, with a dozen different kinds of predators. Tyler Briggs wasn't going to leave it. He couldn't. She just stripped him of his armor in front of his tribe, exposed the weakness underneath his wealth and swagger. He would have to retaliate. Not with words this time. Words had failed him. Something more direct, more physical, something that would reassert his dominance and put this uppity black woman back in her place. Maya's hand tightened slightly on the marker, her body already reading the room's tension, already calculating angles and distances and the approximately 4 seconds it would take Tyler to make whatever stupid decision he was about to make. The catalyst was in place. The activation energy was dropping. The reaction was now inevitable. She just had to wait for chemistry to do what chemistry always did. Follow the laws that existed before any of them were born and would continue long after they were gone. Retry. The moment stretched like hot glass before it shattered. Maya had returned to the board, writing the equation for catalytic decomposition. When she heard it, the scrape of Tyler's chair sliding back with enough force to make other students flinch. Then footsteps, rapid and heavy, crossing the linoleum with purpose that every combat veteran recognized instantly. Threat incoming. She'd already begun turning when his hand slammed down on the lab bench beside her with a crack that made beakers rattle. The sound ricocheted through the classroom like a gunshot, and suddenly Tyler was there, in her space, violating every boundary with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "You think you're so fucking smart," he hissed, his voice low and shaking with rage barely contained. "You think you can humiliate me in my own classroom?" His classroom, the entitlement, was almost beautiful in its purity. Maya stood perfectly still, her body language deliberately neutral, giving him nothing. She could see Marcus and Connor frozen at their station, could see Jasmine Chun with her hand over her mouth, could see the other students shrinking back like prey animals, sensing the predator's focus had shifted. "Mr. Briggs," she said quietly, her voice carrying no emotion whatsoever, "step back." It was the wrong thing to say, or perhaps the right thing, depending on how you measured outcomes. Tyler's face twisted into something ugly, something that had probably been hiding under that pretty boy exterior his whole privileged life. His friends were watching. His authority had been challenged. His father's money couldn't fix this particular humiliation fast enough. So he did what entitled boys throughout history had done when words failed them, and witnesses were present to see them reclaim power. His hand shot out, fast and brutal, and closed around Maya's throat. The classroom erupted in gasps and screams. Someone yelled, "Tyler, no!" But the words came too late, dissolving into the moment that was already unfolding with terrible momentum. Tyler's fingers pressed into the sides of her neck, not quite choking, but absolutely dominating, his quarterback strength behind the grip. His face was inches from hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his eyes wild with that mixture of rage and triumph that came from reasserting physical dominance. "You don't talk to me like that," he snarled. "You don't embarrass me. You're just a—" He never finished the sentence, because Maya's eyes had changed. The careful neutrality, the clinical detachment, the teacher's measured restraint, all of it vanished in the space between heartbeats. What replaced it was something Tyler Briggs had never encountered in his 17 years of protected, privileged existence. The eyes of someone who'd killed before and would again if the tactical situation required it. The eyes of Sergeant Maya Reynolds, who'd just watched a threat put hands on her in a room full of civilians she was now responsible for protecting. The eyes of a weapon that had been waiting, patient and coiled, for someone to finally give her permission to stop pretending she was harmless. Tyler saw it, that shift, that transformation, and for the first time in his life, he understood what real predators looked like. By then, it was far too late. Maya's right hand moved first, not in panic, not in anger, but with the precise mechanical efficiency of muscle memory carved into nerve pathways through 10,000 repetitions in a dozen combat zones. Her hand shot up between Tyler's arms, the blade of her palm striking his inner wrists with surgical accuracy at the pressure points where nerves clustered close to bone. The impact was controlled, measured, exactly enough force to disrupt his grip without breaking anything. Yet, Tyler's fingers spasmed open involuntarily, his body responding to neurological override his brain didn't understand. He had maybe half a second to register confusion before Maya's left hand came up and trapped his right wrist, her thumb pressing into the radial nerve with the casual precision of someone who disabled far more dangerous opponents in far more desperate circumstances. "Bad decision," she said quietly, her voice carrying none of the teacher's measured calm. This was briefing room cold, operational flat, the tone that came before controlled violence. Tyler tried to pull back, his quarterback strength suddenly meaning nothing against leverage and angles, and 200 years of martial refinement compressed into movements his body couldn't track. Maya pivoted on her back foot, basic Krav Maga, the kind designed for close-quarters reality rather than sporting elegance. And Tyler's world tilted sideways as she redirected his own momentum against him. The classroom erupted in chaos. Students were screaming, scrambling back from their stations, knocking over beakers that shattered against linoleum. Someone was yelling, "Oh my God," over and over like a prayer. Connor's phone clattered to the floor, still recording, capturing everything from a tilted angle. Tyler swung with his free hand, wild and unpracticed, the punch of someone who'd never actually been in a real fight. Maya's forearm came up and redirected it with minimal effort, like swatting away an insect. Then her right hand found his elbow, and she applied pressure to the joint in a direction elbows were never designed to bend. Tyler screamed, high and scared, and nothing like the confident swagger he'd worn into the classroom. The sound had that particular quality of someone discovering that pain was real, that his body could betray him, that privilege offered no protection against anatomy. "You're going to calm down," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying absolute authority through the chaos. "You're going to stop resisting, and you're going to realize that you just assaulted a teacher in front of 30 witnesses." She wasn't using full force. Some distant, still rational part of her consciousness was monitoring that carefully, making sure she stayed on the legal side of self-defense. But her body had taken over with the automatic responses drilled into it through years of training. And Tyler was learning the difference between high school wrestling and someone who'd survived hand-to-hand combat in places where mistakes meant body bags. Marcus finally moved, lunging forward with some half-formed idea of helping his friend. Maya's eyes snapped to him with predator focus, and whatever he saw in that gaze made him freeze mid-step like a rabbit spotting a wolf. "Don't," Maya said flatly. "School security has already been notified. Stand down." She hadn't notified anyone, didn't need to. The screaming had done that. But Marcus didn't know that, and the absolute certainty in her voice convinced him she had everything under control in ways that made his intervention irrelevant. Tyler was crying now, tears streaming down his red face as Maya maintained pressure on his elbow joint. Not enough to dislocate it. Not quite. Just enough to make him understand how quickly that could change if she decided it should. "Please," he gasped. "Please, you're hurting me. Please stop." "I will stop when you stop being a threat," Maya said, her clinical detachment absolute. "Are you a threat, Mr. Briggs?" No, I'm not. I'm sorry, please." "Are you going to assault any other teachers today?" "No. God, no. Please just let go." Maya's eyes scanned the classroom. Threat assessment automatic and instantaneous. 32 students, all backed against walls or frozen at their stations. No additional aggressors. Exit routes clear. The situation was contained. She released Tyler's elbow, but maintained wrist control, spinning him with practiced efficiency until his arm was hyperextended behind his back in a textbook compliance hold. He sobbed as she walked him backward toward his lab station and pushed him down into his chair with enough controlled force that he collapsed into it. "Hands on the desk," she commanded. "Palms flat. Don't move." Tyler obeyed instantly, his hands shaking as he pressed them against the black lab bench. His face was a mess of tears and snot and absolute humiliation, his expensive jersey dark with sweat. Maya stepped back, positioning herself where she could watch both Tyler and the rest of the class, her body still coiled and ready. The gold ring on her right hand had left a small impression on Tyler's wrist where she'd gripped him, a mark that would fade in minutes but would live forever in whatever footage Connor's phone had captured. The classroom door burst open and Mr. Patterson, the English teacher Tyler had destroyed 2 years ago, stood there wide-eyed and breathing hard from running. I heard screaming, "What?" He stopped, taking in the scene. Maya standing in combat-ready posture, Tyler sobbing at his desk, 30 students pressed against walls looking traumatized, broken glass glittering across the floor. "Mr. Briggs assaulted me," Maya said, her voice returning to something approaching teacher-neutral. "He grabbed my throat during class. I defended myself. School security needs to be contacted immediately, and I need you to serve as a witness." Patterson's eyes went wide, then slid to Tyler with something that might have been satisfaction or might have been horror or might have been both. "I'll call them now," he said quietly, already pulling out his phone. Maya nodded once and returned her attention to Tyler, who was still crying into his hands, still unable to process how completely his world had just inverted. The catalyst had worked perfectly. The reaction was complete. Now came the consequences. The 2 minutes between Tyler's hand on her throat and school security's arrival stretched into something elastic and strange, time moving at the pace it always did when adrenaline flooded the system and training overrode conscious thought. Maya stood perfectly still, watching Tyler sob into his hands at his lab station, and felt the familiar sensation of her body operating on 2 levels simultaneously. The surface level, the one visible to the 32 traumatized students pressed against walls and lab benches, remained calm, controlled, the chemistry teacher who'd simply defended herself from assault. But underneath, deeper than conscious thought, her muscle memory was still cataloging threats and calculating responses with the cold precision of something that had been forged in places where hesitation meant death. She'd felt at the moment Tyler's fingers closed around her throat, that internal switch flipping from civilian mode to operator mode with the smoothness of a well-oiled machine. Her body had known what to do before her brain consciously registered the attack. The strike to his pressure points, the wrist trap, the elbow manipulation that had made him scream. But there had been a moment, just one, where her body had wanted to do more. The joint lock she'd applied to Tyler's elbow had been calibrated for compliance and control. But her hands had known exactly how much additional pressure would dislocate it completely, how much more force would tear ligaments beyond repair. They'd known because they'd done it before in a firefight outside Kandahar when an insurgent had gotten too close and her rifle had been empty and her survival had depended on making sure he never grabbed another soldier. She'd felt the ghost of that knowledge in her fingers as Tyler screamed, had felt how easy it would be to let muscle memory complete the sequence, to finish what training had started. How satisfying it would be to teach this entitled child exactly what happened when you put hands on someone who'd been taught to end threats permanently. She hadn't. She'd maintained control, stopped at compliance rather than destruction, chosen the teacher's restraint over the soldier's efficiency. But God, it had been close. Tyler's right wrist was already swelling where she'd gripped it, the joint protesting the angles she'd forced it through. Not broken. She'd been careful, but definitely sprained. He kept flexing his fingers like he couldn't quite believe they still worked, like he'd felt the same ghost she had, the shadow of how much worse it could have been. His left elbow was turning colors, purple bruises blooming where her thumb had pressed into nerve clusters. That would hurt for days, would make lifting weights or throwing footballs an agonizing reminder of the moment he'd grabbed the wrong teacher's throat. The sound he'd made when she'd applied pressure to that elbow joint, that high, terrified scream, still echoed in the silent classroom. Several students were crying quietly. Jasmine Chin had her phone out, but wasn't recording, just clutching like a lifeline. Marcus stood frozen at his station, his face pale, looking at Tyler like he'd never seen him before. Connor's phone lay on the floor where he dropped it, the The screen cracked but still recording, capturing everything from that tilted angle. Maya had seen it fall during the confrontation, but had made no move to stop it. Let record. Let there be evidence. Let everyone see exactly what happened when privileged boys learned that some boundaries had consequences. "Miss Reynolds," came a small voice from the back of the classroom. It was Jasmine, speaking barely above a whisper. Are you okay?" The question almost broke something in Maya's carefully maintained composure. Because no, she wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay since Kandahar, since the IED that had killed her father, since the night she'd been forced to use her hands as weapons and had discovered she was terrifyingly good at it. But she couldn't say that. Couldn't explain that Tyler grabbing her throat had triggered responses she'd spent years trying to bury, had reminded her body of muscle memory she desperately wanted to forget. "I'm fine," she said instead, her voice steady despite the lie. "Thank you for asking, Jasmine." Tyler made a sound between a sob and a laugh, bitter and broken. "Fine," he repeated, his voice thick with tears and snot. "You're fine. I'm the one whom I arm you almost." "I defended myself using appropriate force," Maya interrupted, her tone clinical. "You assaulted me. I stopped you. Those are the facts, Mr. Briggs." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Tyler said, looking up at her with red-rimmed eyes that held something new, genuine fear mixed with dawning comprehension. "That wasn't just self-defense. That was, you've done that before. You've hurt people before." The classroom went even quieter, if that was possible. Everyone was staring at Maya now, with that same mixture of fear and fascination, seeing her for the first time as something other than their chemistry teacher. "I served 8 years in the United States Army," Maya said evenly. "I was deployed to combat zones 3 times. Yes, Mr. Briggs, I received training in hand-to-hand combat as part of my military service. And yes, I've used that training before in situations far more dangerous than a high school classroom." She paused, making sure every student heard what came next. "But I also received extensive training in restraint, in proportional response, in distinguishing between neutralizing a threat and causing unnecessary harm. What I did to you was the absolute minimum force required to stop your assault and protect myself and the other students in this room. If I had wanted to hurt you, Mr. Briggs, you would currently be on your way to the hospital instead of crying at your desk." The words hung in the air like chemical vapor, toxic and undeniable. Tyler stared at her with something approaching horror, finally understanding that he hadn't just grabbed a teacher. He grabbed someone who'd survived firefights and IEDs in situations where the wrong move meant a flag-draped coffin. He'd grabbed someone who'd been taught to kill efficiently and had somehow chosen not to, even when his hands were on her throat and her body was screaming at her to eliminate the threat permanently. The door burst open again, and this time it was Principal Whitmore followed by 2 school security officers, both men in their 50s who looked utterly unprepared for whatever scene they'd been called to. "What in God's name?" Whitmore started, then stopped as he took in the tableau. Tyler sobbing at his desk with visible injuries. Maya standing at parade rest with that 1,000-yard stare, 30 students looking traumatized, broken glass scattered across the floor. "Tyler Briggs assaulted Miss Reynolds," Patterson said from the doorway, his voice carrying unexpected steel. "He grabbed her by the throat during class. She defended herself. I'll testify to that, and so will everyone else in this room." Whitmore's face went through several color changes, red to white to gray, as he processed the implications. Tyler's father on the school board, the lawsuit potential, the publicity nightmare. Maya watched him calculate in real time, watch him try to find the angle that would minimize damage to the school's reputation. "I need statements from everyone," Whitmore finally said, his administrator voice reasserting itself. "Tyler, you need to come with me immediately." "Miss Reynolds, you should probably." "I'm staying with my students," Maya interrupted quietly. "They've witnessed a traumatic event. They need supervision and support. You can take Mr. Briggs and conduct your investigation, but I'm not leaving this classroom until the period ends and these students are safely transitioned to their next class." It wasn't a request. Whitmore heard that, seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of whatever he saw in Maya's eyes. "Fine," he said weakly. "Tyler, let's go. Now." Tyler stood shakily, cradling his injured arm, and walked toward the door like a man walking to his execution. At the threshold, he turned back one last time, his eyes finding Maya's. "You're crazy," he whispered. "You're actually fucking crazy." Maya held his gaze without blinking, without expression, and said nothing at all. Because what could she say? That he was right? That she felt the ghost in her muscle memory and had barely stopped it from taking full control? That some part of her had wanted to finish what he'd started, wanted to teach him the lesson her body remembered teaching enemies in deserts half a world away? Tyler left with Whitmore and security, and the classroom door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like the end of something. Maya turned to her remaining students, 32 pairs of eyes staring at her with newfound understanding and undisguised fear, and felt the weight of what she'd revealed settle onto her shoulders like tactical gear she'd never quite managed to take off. "Class dismissed early," she said quietly. "See you tomorrow." They fled. The classroom emptied in less than 30 seconds, students gathering their belongings with trembling hands and casting backward glances at Maya, like she was a live grenade they'd accidentally activated. The door clicked shut behind the last of them, leaving her alone with the wreckage. Broken beakers glittering on the floor, overturned stools, the ghost of Tyler screaming, still hanging in the air like residue. Maya stood motionless for a long moment, her hands at her sides, feeling the adrenaline begin its slow drain from her system. The crash would come later, she knew. It always did. The shaking hands, the tight chest, the dreams where she was back in that forward operating base watching her father's flag-draped coffin load onto a transport plane. But not yet. First, there was still one thing left unfinished. She'd seen it in Tyler's eyes as Whitmore led him away. The defiance still lurking underneath the fear and humiliation. The boy who'd spent 17 years learning that consequences were negotiable, that his father's money could erase any mistake, that apologies were for people without lawyers. Maya knew that look. She'd seen it on insurgents who thought American rules of engagement made soldiers weak, on local warlords who believed their family connections put them above accountability, on every privileged predator who'd never learned that power without honor was just cruelty with a trust fund. The military had taught her many things, but one lesson had been carved deeper than all the others. You don't walk away from a confrontation until the threat acknowledges what happened, until they say the words, until they understand, somewhere in their bones, that actions have weight and violence as consequences. Tyler Briggs hadn't said the words. Maya moved to the door and opened it. The hallway was chaos, students clustering in groups, whispering frantically, phones out and recording everything for social media. She spotted Tyler 50 feet down the corridor, flanked by Whitmore and the 2 security officers, moving toward the administrative wing. "Mr. Briggs," Maya called out, her voice carrying that particular quality of command that made even the gossiping students fall silent. "Stop." Everyone froze. Whitmore turned, his face already forming a protest. Tyler stopped, but didn't turn around, his shoulders hunched, his injured arms still cradled against his chest. "Miss Reynolds, I don't think," Whitmore started. "Mr. Briggs will apologize to me before he leaves this floor," Maya said, walking toward them with measured steps. "For the assault, for putting his hands on me, for creating a dangerous situation in my classroom." Whitmore's face went pale. "Now really isn't the time. We need to get him to the office, contact his parents, document everything." "He'll apologize first," Maya repeated, stopping directly in front of Tyler. "Look at me, Mr. Briggs." Tyler kept his gaze fixed on the floor, his jaw clenched, his whole body radiating the stubborn defiance of someone who still believed this situation could be managed, that his father's lawyers would make it disappear, that he could wait this out and emerge victorious on the other side. Maya's voice dropped into the register she'd used for training new recruits, for soldiers who thought they were too tough to follow orders, for anyone who needed to learn the difference between authority and tyranny. "I said, look at me, private." The word private hit him like a physical blow. Tyler's head snapped up involuntarily, some primal part of his brain responding to the tone even as his conscious mind rebelled. His eyes met hers, and whatever he saw there made him flinch. "You put your hands on me," Maya said quietly, each word falling like a hammer strike. You assaulted a teacher in front of 30 witnesses because your pride couldn't handle being corrected. You grabbed my throat because you believe your privilege made you untouchable. Tears were streaming down Tyler's face again, but different tears now. Not the panic sobbing from before, but something that looked almost like understanding, like the first crack in a dam that had been holding back years of accumulated consequences. Apologize, Maya commanded. Not because I'm demanding it. Not because Principal Whitmore is watching. But because you need to say the words and mean them and understand that what you did was wrong. The hallway was absolutely silent. Students had their phones out, recording everything, documenting the moment Tyler Briggs, untouchable quarterback, son of power, destroyer of teachers, finally faced something his father's money couldn't fix. I'm sorry, Tyler whispered, his voice breaking. Louder. And look at me when you say it. Tyler's whole body was shaking now, his face red and wet, his injured arm forgotten in the weight of this public humiliation. I'm sorry, Miss Reynolds. I'm sorry I grabbed you. I'm sorry I assaulted you. I was wrong. The words came out in a rush, genuine and broken and absolutely devastating to whatever remained of his carefully constructed persona. Maya held his gaze for 3 more seconds, long enough to make sure the lesson landed, short enough to preserve some shred of his dignity, then nodded once. Thank you, Mr. Briggs. Principal Whitmore, you can take him now. She turned and walked back toward her classroom, her spine straight, her steps measured, leaving Tyler sobbing openly in the hallway while security escorted him away and 36 phones captured every second of his destruction. Behind her, she heard Whitmore say something about highly irregular and proper procedures, but his voice sounded distant and irrelevant, already drowned out by the sound of students whispering frantically, already being overwritten by the videos uploading to social media, already becoming part of a narrative that Tyler Briggs would never escape. Maya reached her classroom door and paused with her hand on the handle, feeling the gold ring heavy on her finger. Her father's ring. Master Sergeant Maya Reynolds, who'd taught her that honor meant doing the hard thing even when the easy thing was available, that protecting the weak sometimes meant confronting the strong, that some battles you couldn't walk away from even if you wanted to. She wanted to walk away from this one, had spent months burying the soldier and playing the teacher, pretending she could be someone softer, someone who didn't know exactly how to break bones and end threats. But Tyler Briggs had put his hands on her throat, and muscle memory had older rights than conscious choice. Now everyone knew what she'd been trying to hide. Now there was no walking back. The video hit social media 17 minutes after Tyler's forced apology in the hallway. Connor's crack screen phone had captured everything from that tilted angle on the floor. Tyler's hand shooting out to grab Maya's throat, her lightning fast counter, the joint lock that made him scream, his sobbing pleas for mercy. Someone had edited it with slow-motion replays and added captions. Bully learns hard lesson, and teacher was actually military badass. By lunch, it had 40,000 views. By dismissal, 300,000. By the time Maya drove home that evening, her hands still occasionally trembling from adrenaline crash, the video had gone viral with 1.2 million views and climbing. The comment section was a war zone of opinions, but one narrative dominated. Tyler Briggs, privileged white boy, had assaulted a black female teacher and discovered she was a decorated combat veteran who'd shown remarkable restraint in not breaking every bone in his entitled body. The police arrived at the school during 6th period. 2 officers, both looking uncomfortable as Whitmore, tried to minimize the incident as a student altercation that got out of hand. But Connor's video made that narrative impossible. Assault was assault, regardless of the perpetrator's last name or his father's position on the school board. They took statements from everyone. 32 students, all saying the same thing. Tyler Briggs had verbally harassed Miss Reynolds with racially charged comments, then physically assaulted her by grabbing her throat. Miss Reynolds had defended herself using what appeared to be professional training, stopping the threat without causing permanent injury despite clearly having the capability to do much worse. Mr. Patterson, the English teacher Tyler had destroyed 2 years ago, gave his statement with barely concealed satisfaction. I heard the screaming and arrived to find Mr. Briggs crying at his desk after Miss Reynolds had restrained him. She was completely professional. She told me exactly what happened and requested I contact security. The police filed their report with clinical precision, assault and battery, felony level due to the strangulation component. Tyler Briggs, 17 years old, would be charged as an adult. His father's lawyers descended like locusts, but the video made their job impossible. You couldn't lawyer your way out of footage watched by millions. The school board held an emergency meeting that night. Richard Briggs recused himself, his face gray, already knowing how this would end. The other board members, suddenly freed from his influence and terrified of the public relations nightmare, voted unanimously. Tyler Briggs was suspended pending expulsion proceedings. Zero tolerance for violence against staff. The college acceptance letter, full scholarship to USC, football and academics, was revoked within 48 hours. The admissions office cited the assault charge and issued a brief statement about institutional values and community safety. Other schools that had been recruiting Tyler pulled their offers within the week. Meanwhile, Maya's military service record became public knowledge as news outlets dug into the story. The local paper ran a profile. Teacher who defended herself is decorated war veteran. 3 combat deployments. Multiple commendations. A Purple Heart she'd never mentioned to anyone at Lincoln Preparatory. The district superintendent issued a statement praising Maya's remarkable professionalism and restraint in a threatening situation. Teachers who'd been wary of her cold demeanor suddenly saw her differently. Not as intimidating, but as someone who'd survived things they couldn't imagine and still showed up to teach chemistry to ungrateful teenagers. Students returned to her class on Monday with new respect bordering on awe. The whispers changed from too intense to total badass. Jasmine Shun brought her flowers. Marcus Fleming, Tyler's former friend, apologized for laughing at Tyler's racist jokes. Tyler never returned to Lincoln Preparatory. He finished his senior year at a private institution that specialized in students with behavioral challenges, code for kids whose parents paid enough to avoid expulsion. His social media went dark. His friends stopped posting pictures with him. The quarterback position went to a junior who'd been waiting years for the opportunity. 6 months later, Maya learned through faculty gossip that Tyler had enrolled at a community college under a different name, trying to rebuild what he destroyed in the 3 seconds it took to grab the wrong teacher's throat. She felt no satisfaction in his fall, just a weary recognition that some lessons required permanent consequences, that some mistakes couldn't be erased by privilege or money or lawyers, that actions, especially violent ones, left marks that no amount of wealth could polish away. She still wore her father's ring, still arrived 43 minutes early, still scanned every room for threats and exits and sightlines, because that training never left, that muscle memory never forgot. But now when she walked the hallways, students stepped aside not from fear, but from respect. Now when she taught, they listened not because she was strict, but because they understood what discipline actually meant, what real strength looked like, what it cost to survive the kind of crucibles that forged soldiers from civilians. Tyler Briggs had wanted to humiliate her, to put her in her place, to remind her that his power trumped her authority. Instead, he'd revealed exactly who Maya Reynolds was underneath the lab coat and lesson plans. And that revelation had ruined him completely.